Hello, everyone. Welcome to Risk and Regulations. My name is Carl Brown. I'm the head of content at Assemble Media Group, and I'm chairing this discussion today, which looks at the first year of the new building safety regime and the Building Safety Regulator's future roadmap. The construction industry is facing a huge challenge in getting its collective head around the new post-Grenfell regulatory requirements. There is a hell of a lot to understand, not least, whether it's new gateway processes, building registration requirements, a new building control regime, safety case reports, the new golden thread of information, or measuring and assessing competence, and much more besides. There's lots to think about. Luckily, to help us unpick some of these issues here today, we're joined by a great panel who I shall now introduce. We have James McNay, who's a Divisional Director for Fire Safety at Hydrock. We have Vicky Saunders, who's the Managing Director of BTP Architects. And we have Susanna Nicol, who's the Chief Executive of Build UK. Each of our panelists will speak for around 8 to 10 minutes, and that should leave us plenty of time for your questions at the end. To leave the questions, simply use the drop-down panel, which you should be able to see on the left-hand side of the screen, and I shall try and get to as many of them as I can in the second part of the session. That's plenty from me. I'm going to go straight into the first presentation, which is from James of Hydrock. James, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Carl. So I am going to share some slides, mainly as a memory aid for myself so I don't go too off-piste. It's a topic that I could speak for forever and a day on. So we shall just share the screen. Okay. Well, someone can shout out if you can't see the screen. Maybe Carl, if you can't see it, let me know. Otherwise, I will crack on. So what I'm going to speak about initially is around competence and the culture change that we're all aware of. Everyone's talking about this culture change that we're going through in the built environment. And mainly looking at the competence that is required as part of that culture change is quite a challenge, as Carl actually hinted at in that introduction there. So a very brief introduction to myself. So I'm James McNay. I am in the position where I've branched both petrochemical and high hazard and the built environment. So I spent just over 10 years working in oil and gas, where a lot of these concepts that are now being introduced into the built environment are fairly standard practice after the Piper Alpha disaster in 1988. The culture change that oil and gas went through after that is very similar. There are some very similar parallels. So I'm going to touch on that just through my introduction here a little bit, and some of those concepts will continue to appear through the discussion. So I'm sure we've all heard about the safety case requirements, which are now coming in, which Carl also mentioned in the introduction. With respect to safety case, there's a mindset involved in the safety case, not just the production of a report. You know, the safety case is not just a combination of documents like a fire and emergency file, for example. A safety case is very much a way of thinking. It's a live document. It manages the change through a building and actually assesses the risk of a facility in determining whether that facility or that building is safe or otherwise, whether the risk is tolerable or not. And I've included a picture, which is actually an embarrassing picture. It creates a little bit of evidence that I've done my time out on these platforms. The reason I include it, despite the fact I really don't like this photo, is twofold. One, because it's a selfie, and I haven't taken a selfie in over 10 years, and I cringe at the thought of having done that. The second one actually refers to what we're going to talk about here. Now, you'll notice I've taken a photograph while listening to music on the helideck of an offshore installation, which is not really the kind of thing that you should be doing out on these platforms. Now, it's worth pointing out this was on a facility in the Caspian Sea. You would certainly never be able to do this on a facility in the North Sea with the mindset and the culture that we have in the North Sea. So it's a little reflection there on where we are as an industry in oil and gas in this country and where we're going in the built environment. So because I've branched across those two sectors, I often get asked the question about which I believe is more dangerous, a complex or a higher risk building in the built environment, or an oil rig 200 miles off the coast of Aberdeen in the North Sea. And a lot of this comes down to perception about which facility you would perceive as being more dangerous, rather than digging into the statistics around workplace injuries and fatalities on an oil rig versus fatalities in a building in the built environment. And what I mean by perception, it reminds me of the announcement that we were going to be getting a spaceport in Scotland. Any sci-fi fans will start conjuring up images of what a spaceport might look like. So you have this perception in your head that it's going to be this, fancy facility, incredibly high tech. And that's what a lot of people believe that safety in the hazardous industries looks like, that there's something particularly special going on there, that it's, cutting edge engineering. But ultimately, as with the reality around these things, like the spaceport in Scotland, the reality doesn't always marry up to the perception. Now, what you'll notice from this image of what the spaceport more realistically looks like, there's a couple of things really jump out there. One is that it's functional, it's fit for purpose, and it's as simple as it needs to be. And this is how safety in the hazardous industries is generally taken. We look at what's the objective and how do we achieve that objective. Now, part of that is being competent to determine the objective and to work that route towards achieving that objective safely. So this is the kind of culture and the thought process which is coming into the built environment. Because in the built environment, we have functional requirements as part of the regulations. And part of an outcome-based regulatory outlook, there is a requirement of competence there. Competence has to be first and foremost and critical in any functional requirement and outcome-based regulatory environment. So what does that look like? Well, some of all of these concepts are, first and foremost front and center in oil and gas, for example, the principle of compliance versus risk. And anyone who's worked in these types of environment will be aware of the bow tie on the top right of the screen here, where you have, the hazards which can occur. You've got preventative barriers to prevent those hazards from being realized. If that doesn't work, or if there's failures along that route, you get to your top event or your singular event, which could be a fire, it could be a blast, it could be a gas release on an oil platform. Once that occurs, we then have the route towards it becoming a major accident. And we've got our mitigation functions to the right of that central event. Now, how do we assess this? We have various different traditional risk models which we can use. Quite a common one we all know about, the domino effect, being a sequential risk model, where one failure will lead to another, which will lead to another. We then had the evolution into epidemiological risk models, where you have the LOPA, layer of protection analysis, the Swiss cheese model, which is quite famous, where you have gaps in your barriers, and basically an accident occurs when those gaps align, and you end up with an event from taking place. And then we've got the more modern risk model in systemic risk analysis. And interestingly, I've heard Dame Judith Hackett refer to systemic issues in the built environment, which really lead us towards assessing the built environment risks as a system. And by a system, we would mean the interaction between humans, technology, and the environment. It looks a lot more at the specific context in any given moment that can lead to an accident. So without going really into the nuts and bolts of all of that, if we're to have an outcome-based approach, we have to consider risk, and we have to consider tolerable risk rather than simply following guidance and blindly following guidance which is in place, because that's not the route to achieve a performance-based outcome. And that's a big step, and that requires competence, going back to the content of really what I want to talk about here, which is going to be critical when we consider the Building Safety Regulator and their role, the competence both in the workforce and the competence within the BSR. They're absolutely critical. And to have a look at what needs to be done, we have to look at outcome-based regulation and what happens when that's coupled with incompetence in an industry and where that can lead. And ultimately, the question arises that if you simply follow guidance, are you a competent engineer? And again, thinking back to oil and gas, where's the approved document B, for example, in oil and gas? Well, it doesn't exist. In oil and gas, performance-based engineering has to be front and center. And the engineers are in the driving seat to review the risk, to put in place barriers which will be appropriate, and then to demonstrate that risk to the major accident hazards unit within the health and safety executive, and to make that case. And ultimately, if we come back into the built environment and a building's fire safety strategy simply presents guidance at the time of construction, does that result in a fire safe building? And ultimately, the conclusion to that, in my opinion, is that it does not. Guidance can change, it can be updated. First principles fire safety engineering remains constant. And we have to be applying this, and speaking from my own background as a fire safety engineer, we have to be able to apply these first principles fire engineering concepts to demonstrate that a building meets the functional requirements. Which brings us to the Building Safety Regulator, in the fact that what we hear is that the question is going to be, demonstrate to us that your building meets those functional requirements. And the only way I believe we can do that is by having competent design professionals that demonstrate a case that the building meets the functional requirements, rather than a heavy reliance on the guidance in place at any given time. So summarising that up, as I believe we're quite close to the 10-minute mark there. So the current building regulations do put an extraordinary weight on competent professional practices. When we have that framework, only a competent professional can peer review the work of a competent professional. And peer review really has to be critical as part of this process. Obviously, those involved in the built environment really need to be demanding proof of quality and of competence in the organizations that they employ and the people that they employ to work on these buildings, both during design, construction, and occupation. And the final point I wanted to include here was simply that we shouldn't be waiting to be told what to do, and that competent engineers should be comfortable in taking responsibility and leading the design in creating safe buildings, and then making that case to the BSR. And that is the end of my slides. So I will hand back to Carl, who I hope is still on the call.
Carl, are you there? Okay, well, I'm up next. Shall I continue with following on from James? Thank you very much. I will continue with my presentation now. Can you, hopefully, James, can you see my presentation?
Not yet, but that might be the view that I have.
We
can't see anything. Yeah, there we go.
Have you got it? Lovely. Okay, stuff. Well, I'm Vicky Saunders, Managing Director of BTP Architects, and I have over 30 years experience in all types of housing and all types of builds, really. Counting for our insurance purposes, we have refurbished over 30 high-rise buildings now. So really, we are the specialists in the market. Just a bit of the timeline. I know you're all familiar with the timeline, and we are 12 months on from the Building Safety Act and the secondary legislation that was brought in October. But already the April deadline of the 6th for the regulation of the building controls has been set back for 13 weeks and is now the 6th. So we're already having some teething issues with timescales and compliance. First thing I want to just dwell on, there's a few things, is the illusion of control. I've called it the illusion of control. This is the lighthouse building that had the second significant fire after Grenfell. And I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you can see the fire here. My particular favourites are the cavity barriers that are masking taped in. There's party wall, and then there's the cavity barrier here that is not even suitable for aluminium. It is for a brick. So what we're actually dealing with is stock that we do not have knowledge of. And this is another example, prior to the Building Safety Fund, the works that are completed in 2015, where you can see that the existing condition is not just about we are uncovering, obviously taking off flammable materials, but the state of the stock is very, very poor. And this SFS here is rusted. You can see that the remediation that's required to the back, to the structure at the back of it is immense as well. And obviously the remediation that's gone on, and the care and attention that's been taken to detail to make sure that we're making these buildings safe. But the point is, we still actually don't know how a lot of our buildings are constructed, and this is a risk and this is a worry. And I want to just sort of talk a bit about the regulations that have been brought in, and James has sort of touched on the rules. The 18-metre rule is one that I see as a bit of concern, because in England we still have a lot of stock, that is 11 metres. Now, why am I going on about stock that's 11 metres? Well, it's because the fire engines ladders, or the Lancon ladder, only goes up to 11 metres. So why in England have we got an 18-metre rule when Scotland and Wales are on the 11-metre rule? It's quite simply, politically, we can't take on all the buildings that are over 11 metres, just can't finance it. And the other thing is, with the regulations, another element to them is that they're only for general let. They do not consider how residents actually need to escape. So if you've got a care home, it could be considered high risk and even beyond 2 stories. So what I'm saying here is be careful, because the rules are the rules, but we need to be sensible when we interpret them, and best practice, follow guideline. These are the regulatory rules, but use some common sense. We're into the gateways 1, 2, and 3. We've had the gateway 1 for a long time. Now, with the planning, we're versed with that. That goes into the local authority planning, still the same for the buildings. But gateways 2 and 3 are in the transitional period, which is ending on the 6th of April. Now, gateways 2 and 3 are hard stops. So you cannot start work until you have these approvals. So it takes a lot more preparation up front to gather the documentation, and rightly so, and make sure that we commit to what is actually being on the plans is being built. So how do we move forward? Well, this is projects that we've successfully worked on and managed to remediate. So there are good ways through it. Working with the right team will protect your risk, and the right contractor. Just to touch on, the client has the responsibility to appoint duty holders. Now, you've got 3 duty holders. You've got the client, the principal designer, and the principal contractor. And a client must make suitable arrangements for planning, managing, and monitoring a project as to ensure compliance with all the regulations. So this is quite an important point. Grenfell, they couldn't put anybody on the hook. So the client now, you are on the hook, no doubt about it. If you commission a building, you have to make sure that you have the right team around you to say that what you have planned and managed is actually been built. Now, that's quite a big statement. There are some things that I am concerned about within the regulations, and one of them is it just going to be paid lip service to? Because it says, a client is treated as complying with the requirements. Instead of appointing a person for the purposes of these regulations, they certify in writing that the person is the CDM principal designer, or in the case may be the CDM principal contractor, is treated as appointed as the principal designer and the principal contractor for the purposes of these regulations. Well, you might, let's look at the role of a CDM principal designer. They're here to make sure that whilst the job's on site, everybody goes home for their tea. Whereas the building regulations PD is there to make sure that the building regulations, what's drawn on the plan, is checked, monitored, and made sure that actually the client can say, yes, what is actually drawn is built. So for me, I'm a little bit confused as to why the regs can say that the CDM, you can just transfer these duties over, because I see it, quite frankly, not in the same boat. So you must have checks and balances in place, and the regulations don't tell you how to do it. So at the earliest opportunity, you know, the option is the client must appoint people who properly fulfill these roles with competencies. If we just appoint the as one of the statements in the it's 911 statutory instrument, just say, oh, well, the contractor can do, I'm just going to write a letter and just charge my duties. If we're going to change nothing about how we're doing the process, those slides that I showed you before, nothing's going to change. It's a bit like asking the contractor to mark their own homework. And now that the client is now on the hook, you know, as clients, are you comfortable that if you change nothing, you're going to get a different outcome? These are just some examples of managing change control on site that we're using on the high risk, and we're also using this on all other types of buildings as well, so that we're recording, carrying out site inspections and tracking material changes throughout the job is good practice. These are some examples of what we've delivered. This is Kingsway House, which is 51 units, which we fully refurbished internally, new heating systems, past 2035 as well, with air source heat pumps. We've added new balconies, we've added decorative screens to make it a real landmark scheme. But primarily, this is a safe building because the rigour and care that has gone to the detailing, the site inspections, and the support working with the right team has delivered a job that is compliant. The lighthouse, again, I showed you the horror stories of the fire. This is the good news story of us remediating it. And now it's a 19-storey tower block in Manchester. And you can see me there, very pleased at looking at an intumescent fire barrier in the right place. And the Ciniac board all staggered and with mastic. And the fact that there's Regulation 7, that we've got no combustible materials on the balconies, and the fixings and bracketry are all in order. So my question is, you know, where did this leave us? Well, having delivered over, 30 of these buildings from the practice, the high-risk buildings, there is now the RIBA competence register, of which there's 14 registered people on this register, and there's only 2 in the Northwest, which is, both in my practice, myself and Leanne, who are actually registered to work on high-risk buildings and have demonstrated competencies in these areas, which is really important. First of all, the thing to note is that we've had the first amendment. We've had the deadline extended by 13 weeks for the building control statutory instruments, so they don't have to be registered until the 6th of July. We have got, with the Building Safety Fund, Hard Stop and the Gateway 2, these programs need careful interfaces, because it's quite frankly, we've got 2 things here that we've got to get over the line before we can start work. And what can we actually do before a hard stop? Now, there's been purported that we can put the scaffolding up, we can actually start the strip, but we can't put anything back until Gateway 2 is approved. However, contractually, we're going to have scaffolding stood, so it's quite onerous. And our contracts that we're running, our design and build contracts, are not suited to hard stops. So my questions are, what will it take for the client not just to play lip service and undertake the radical change which is actually needed, and also facing the resistance of change of contractors? So that's in a nutshell. We're doing great stuff. There's lots of positives out there, but clients really need to embrace that this regulation has teeth and that they need to take it seriously. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks. Thanks, Vicky. I'm still here. I was battling some technical issues earlier, but thank you very much. That was a really useful update on some of the issues and challenges the industry is facing in meeting the regulations. And thank you also, James. I didn't get a chance to thank you earlier, but I thought that was there's lots to think about there in terms of tolerability of risk. And I thought some of the comparisons with other industries was really insightful as well. I'm now going to move on to our third and final presentation, which is from Susanna Nicol of Build UK. Susanna, over to you.
Thank you very much, Carl. Just checking my sound. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, James and Vicky, as well. I don't have any slides at all. I'm not sure whether you can see me on screen, even though I don't have any slides, though. The construction sector thrives on clarity, consistency, and certainty. And unfortunately, there's not much of that around right now. And there's certainly not much of it in the new building safety regime, which is turning out, as we've already heard, to be more challenging than anybody thought. If we go back to basics, the regime is expecting safe buildings that are safely designed, that are made up of safe products, that are installed or constructed safely, which you would imagine as an industry that specialises in all of that, we could take as business as usual. Who in the industry is going to put their hand up and say they were happy to hand over an unsafe building that did not meet building regulations, that they used unsafe products which were not built to the required standard? We've seen some of the pictures from Vicky's presentation. Now, under the regime, every organisation and every individual in the chain has to demonstrate that they've done all of those things, that they are competent to do their job, that they fulfilled their responsibilities, and most importantly, they will be held accountable for delivering all of that. Under the new building safety regime, someone on every project will be holding what I call the relay race baton of responsibility at any one time, and their fingerprints will be recorded in the golden thread. Now, everyone I speak to understands that things need to be different, that it was too easy to assume that someone else was holding the baton. I would also say that everyone I speak to, and we speak to a lot of people here at Build UK, is that people want to do the right thing. And maybe nobody wants to do the wrong thing. But coming back to that clarity and certainty, with so many regulations coming out, with so many schedules and so much guidance, quite a bit is contradictory. The fact that the average person cannot possibly read and join up, all of that is understandable. And individuals and companies are shying away from making decisions. We've seen that in the fact that not one new higher risk building has yet applied to the Building Safety Regulator for building control approval at Gateway 2. There have been buildings hop into the new regime because they didn't meet the transition periods, and there have been some refurbished work on existing higher risk buildings apply. But certainly as of last week, no new higher risk buildings, which probably tells us all we need to know. There's still no update to approved document B, leaving individuals to understand what it is the government and the Building Safety Regulator is expecting from the various two staircase statements and announcements. Now, I don't believe that anyone is asking to be spoon-fed. But when the government talks about an 18-metre threshold and the Mayor of London still refers to 30 metres and Wales has a completely different requirement, you can understand why stopping and waiting is the preferred option. The cost to companies and individuals of getting it wrong is just too much. You cannot change a culture overnight. And indeed, you can't change a culture by shouting at the industry that it needs to change its culture. We know the industry can deliver when there's a clear voice providing direction. We saw that during COVID. Companies understood the expectation we set out in the site operating procedures and they stepped up. And we can deliver again now. Whilst the regulator finds its feet, companies can take action. We can all use the systems we've got in place so that we are ready to pick up and hold that baton. The Common Assessment Standard is in place, which enables companies to demonstrate their organisational capability. With over 18,000 companies already accredited, government recognition, and a significant number of clients and contractors that build high-rise residential buildings and higher risk buildings are signed up. If you're a member of the supply chain, get the Common Assessment Standard and show that you've got it. We have CSCS cards, and in Smart Check, an easy way to check that installers and others have the right qualification for their role. As the competence frameworks for each occupation are rolled out, we can build the competence of our workforce. And as this is reflected in that card system, you can be confident that their skills are continuously developed. And for products, you can start asking for information to be verified by the Code for Construction Product Information. The building blocks to comply with the new regime and meet those requirements are in place. We don't need to reinvent these systems. We need to work together to build them up. if they're not quite right, or you want to see them do something differently, we have the opportunity to address that, to tweak them, to make them better. Goodness knows there's enough other stuff to get to grips with. So why would we waste valuable resources and brain space duplicating what we already have? At the heart of the new regime are the people who use and live in the buildings our industry provides. I cannot speak for the regulator, but I would imagine in everything they do, they will be asking everyone in that relay race team, did you do everything you should have done to make this building safe for those people? Thank you very much, Carl. I'll hand back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Susanna. There's quite a lot in there, but a bit of a, in many ways, a bit of a rallying call to the industry, as well as some requests for more clarity, I think, on some of the regulations. I'm going to go to the Q&A now. We've had quite a lot of questions come in, and I think I'll start with a couple of kind of broad brush questions, really. So. Sorry, okay, so we've had a question from somebody in the audience saying, what changes under the Building Safety Act so far have had the most impact on the culture of the sector, and how so? And I don't know whether, I don't know who wants to take that one, but I just thought it would be a good one to start. Susanna, I don't know whether you want to. Oh, Vicky, yep.
Oh, there.
Oh, right. Okay. So it's the culture. What's the biggest cultural change that I've seen so far is the fact that the clients have been taken quite by surprise that actually they need to change and they are responsible. So I think even though it's been talked about, is that the client actually, that when I've been talking to them and trying to bring them on board, that it's on you. And that's been a cultural sort of shift, and that has made them think a bit more. The other cultural sort of shift is the fact that the building control, everything, if it needs building control, it needs a PD. It's clipped everything. And the other cultural sort of shift is that it's actually affected every single regulation. 1974 at Work Act, it's got its teeth into everything, and it has teeth. So it's that is the cultural shift. Not yet seeing sort of, I'm seeing a lot of also to change the culture. I'm seeing a little bit of people going, well, how do I get away with this? How do I don't want to do it? So there's sort of shock that, my goodness, it's on me. Don't want to do it. Don't want to change. So that's the culture I'm experiencing.
Is there a sense that the change is not happening quickly enough in your view in some areas, Vicky?
The change that people are wanting to do is find the fastest and easiest way through it. That's my biggest concern, the lip service, that actually the embracing of what this actually means, which is good stuff. You know, Susanna touched on it. It is good stuff that we build buildings safely. I've seen enough buildings in my time to know that this is absolutely fundamental change is required across all the industries, the subcontractors, contractors, and clients' mindset.
Okay, Susanna, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, and I would support a lot of what Vicky said. I hesitate to use the word culture change because I come back to it. You could have a whole conversation about what culture changes, and this industry is massive. It's huge. I think, first of all, there's a recognition that we all need to do things differently, and that collectively the industry needs to be better and understand and accept its responsibilities. We all know the variety of issues in our industry. What I would say is until we change our operating model, we will never address some of these issues. When you continue to drive procurement to the lowest cost rather than recognising best value, when we talk in tender documents and tender documentations about I want competent workforce, I want people to be skilled, but then you aren't prepared to pay for that, or you let that slide out on site. That's not the change we need to see. Everybody needs to step up. So I think we are still in that we want to change, we know we need to change, I would support Vicky's point. I think there's still a whole load of people who think, well, this doesn't apply to me. The regime applies to every single building out there, just various parts of it apply to higher risk buildings and in occupation, high-rise residential buildings. So I think we are still at that early stage of people saying, I can't make that much difference, or it's not about me. And I would say to every single person in the industry, you have a role to play here. Whether it's, are you competent? We still get people saying, oh, I shouldn't have a qualification. I've been doing this for 30 years. Well, haven't been doing it every time great for 30 years, have we? So something has to change, and everybody has to do something differently. If you on this call are not doing something differently, then you are not part of that new regime.
Okay, do you share those observations, James?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and I would kind of just expand on one point, which ties into some of the points in my introduction around the guidance, and it's hard to pin this on a specific section of the Act, but I think and it's going to be very fire centric as the discipline that I'm within, the realization that simply complying with guidance or meeting the guidance is not a bulletproof way to demonstrate that a building is safe. I think that's been a shockwave, I believe, in certain disciplines, that if you simply meet travel distances, fire resistant construction based on X building height, that the building must now be safe. That's a big realization now that people need to be thinking more about the functional requirements. And I think that is more of a wide scale thing about the Building Safety Act rather than a specific section of the Act.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, James. I'm going to move on now. We've had quite a lot of questions about the principal designer role, and there seems to be people have questions over exactly what it means. So we have Scott Smith of Mace, who is asking whether the PD under CDM and PD under the Building Safety Act can they be different organisations or individuals. Grace Churchill of Anstey Horn is a CDM PD, and she's asking, how can I become qualified or competent to be a BSA PD? And then there's another question from Frank Reynolds of Frank Reynolds Architects, basically just asking for that role to be defined more carefully. So defined more clearly by the panel. So I don't know whether Vicky, maybe this is one for you, but there seems to be a lot of questions coming in about the PD role and the BSA and the CDM and the differences between it and that kind of. Yeah.
I mean, for me, the CDM, to just go through those questions first of all, can it be different organisations? Yes. Can the CDM Principal Designer 2015 be a PD? Well, if they've got the competencies and the skill set to know their ways through the building regulations and to be able to manage a site, go through and do inspections and look at it holistically, well, the competencies, the RIBA have set up believing that, and I have stated that they believe that architects are best placed to be doing this role because it's what architects do, the building regulations. I think for me, the CDM 2015, they focus on health and safety. The building regulations focus on the design work compliance. You must plan, manage, and monitor and coordinate health and safety in the pre-construction phase. That's the CDM. But on the principal designer, plan, manage, and monitor the design work, ensuring the design, if built, would comply with the relevant requirements of the building regulations. So design does not stop when you've just done a set of drawings and got your building regs approval. It doesn't actually stop until we've actually built all elements. Yes, some jobs run more smoothly, but until that last brick or whatever is laid, the design isn't complete. The CDM 2015 is to help and advise a client to bring them together, pre-construction information. The Building Regulations PD is to assist the client in providing information to other designers and contractors. So you can see where I'm beginning to see there is a difference for me between both of those roles. And, there is similarities. We have to liaise with the principal contractor, keep them informed of any risk that needs to be controlled during the construction period. That's the CDM 2015. The PD is to liaise with the principal contractor and share information relevant to the building works. So I see them sitting, quite separately. So that's, I don't know if that answers the questions.
Well, I hope the audience the audience members who asked that feel it does. I thought it was a very good answer. Do James or Susanna, do you want to come in on that at all, or not?
I don't have anything to add. I couldn't agree with Vicky
Okay.
more. I think they do sit separately. I agree with everything Vicky just said.
Okay. I'm going to move on then to a question from Alice Fox of Waits. And this is, this is for Susanna, but I think the other panelists can jump in as well. It says, Susanna, you highlight the complexity of the incoming regulations. What do you think is the best way to educate yourself on the changes and the regulations? So there's a lot of complexity out there. How do we get our heads around it as an industry?
Well, clearly, I'm going to say read the Build UK Guide to the Building Safety Regime. We identified there was just so much for people to get to grips with. They couldn't even see the picture of the jigsaw, as we call it. So we set out an overview of the Building Safety Regime, which has been updated every time that there are changes. And what that does is, hopefully, once you've read it, it gives you that picture of what it looks like. You can then start to see which bit of the jigsaw am I and where do I interlink with somebody else. So it then takes you to the right link. We know it's a nightmare just trying to find the right bit of guidance at the moment. I will tell you, as a member of BAC, I am trying to sort that. We have had a whole meeting where we've set out all the different Building Safety Regulator, HSE and government guidance to try and put it in some kind of accessible format. It's really difficult to find. So go and read that, work out where you sit, what your responsibilities are, and then it takes you in a deeper dive down to go and look at, okay, which bit do I need to look at next? We're also doing a very brief overview of the golden thread for exactly the same. There will be some more detailed guidance coming from the CLC, but it's that overview so everybody can say, right, I understand what it is. Where do I fit into it? So that's what I would say is the start point. Look at the overview, understand your role and responsibility, which Vicky and James have both covered to a certain extent. And then what is it I have to do? And I come back to, and use the systems that are in place. If there's a system in place, use that, because it gets you to the point where you can now look at what's the next difficult bit that I've got to look at. It's freely available online. It's supported by Building and it's endorsed by the CLC. What's not to like, Carl?
I had a feeling you would say that, Susanna. But James or Vicky, do you want to come in on that at all? And just in terms of how people can kind of get their head around some of this quite dense regulation.
Well, I see both myself and Vicky unmuted at the same time. I think the only thing that I would raise is the thing about the elephant. You eat an elephant one bite at a time, and it can be quite cumbersome if you're coming in and looking at all the new requirements, and reading any legislation and regulation can be quite cumbersome. So just one small piece at a time, and you end up eating the whole elephant.
Yeah, I've spent a great deal of my recent life reading these regulations, and I've put together a package of because it doesn't tell you how to do it, it tells you what you've got to sort of get there, how I think it looks. And I've come up with formulas to say, well, if we do this on site, that showed you the sheet about how to monitor stuff on site, how to collaborate, how to put checks and balances in place. And I've come up with a system. Well, if you have a lead designer who coordinates all the projects before you get to site, if you then, when you get to site, you have regular site visits to checks and balances to put in place. If you then have a tracked change monitored, sheet that you agree to, you get to the end of the job with an accurate set of as constructed, final issue, as built, whatever you want to call them, because we had to stop calling them as built for insurance purposes, which there's a clue in there, isn't there? The fact that we had to stop calling our drawings as built for insurances because they were not as built. Now, this is the objective, to get them back to a status of as built. And I agree with Susanna, there's lots of stuff out there already in the industry, but if we keep doing the same contracts, the same D&B, the same, and nothing changes, don't expect a different result with the construction. So there's checks and balances. Use your competent teams, get a good team around you. They'll protect your risk and move forward. You know, we know how to do lead designer. We know how to do site inspections. We know how to compare plans with what actually is being built on site. Use your architects. You're there, you know, they're quality defenders.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. Going to move on to a couple of questions and sort of a couple of questions in a similar sort of vein. It's kind of asking the panel's opinion, really. So it's to do with buildings that are categorized as high risk. And John Groom of TDB Solutions is saying, is the BSA high-risk building categorization as fully thought through as it should be? Should it be expanded to include other building types below the current 18-meter threshold? And then we also have a question from David Tomlinson, who, he's gone further and said, his question goes further and says, does the panel believe the BSR should be rolled out to all new builds and refurbishments, not just those, not just the ones currently deemed high risk? So I just wonder whether the panel has any thoughts on that. Are there potentially building types below that threshold that, in your view, should be categorized as high risk?
I wouldn't mind jumping in on that one if I can. I think there's always that risk of creating a two-tier safety environment when you have that blunt object of 18 meters above and below. I think it's fairly realistic to say that there are some buildings that are over 18 meters that are fairly, for want of a better term, the quite safe buildings, reasonably simple in their design and layout. Fire and structure fairly straightforward, that would, unless you open up the walls as we often do and find that there's a calamity behind there, but purely from looking at a design standpoint, they're fairly simple and straightforward buildings. And we've all worked on buildings that are maybe only a few stories that are incredibly complex in how they function. Ultimately, I think there needs to be that blunt object from the regulator to say these are the buildings that we need to start with. And I think there's an element of common sense about, let's start with 18 meters and above and deal with those buildings first, from what we know. But I think everyone in the industry needs to have it in their head that there are buildings under that threshold which are potentially higher risk than the quote unquote higher risk buildings, which is why it's important for people to know the Building Safety Act does apply to all buildings, not just the higher risk buildings.
Okay, does anybody else want to come in on that point?
If I think I would reflect what James has said, and
yeah,
it's not the Building Safety Regulator for one and a free-for-all for everything else.
Yeah,
there is still a regime for the higher risk buildings. You go into the Building Safety Regulator for your building control, and they have a slightly different process with the gateways. If you're out with if you're not with the Building Safety Regulator, you still have to go through the process of building control. You've now got registered inspectors, and just to clarify, as an inspector, you still have to be registered by the 6th of April. You have until the 6th of July to complete your competence assessment. So if you are on a higher risk building and your approver or your inspector is not registered by the 6th of April, you will fall into the Building Safety Regulator if you're a high risk building. So you still need to be registered as an RBI from the 6th of April. So I think, and I would echo what James said, you've got to start somewhere. I would be interested to know if the regulator has the resources to regulate the higher risk buildings once that's up and running, let alone every single building in the country. And I think that becomes a risk balance, and I'm not entirely sure that would be appropriate, as long as the building control system, the regime, and everybody takes on board their responsibilities. There have already been 2 stop notices for projects starting without having gone through the appropriate gateway, as I understand it. So the regulator is already starting to show its teeth whilst it gets to grips with the new regime.
Okay. Vicky, did you want to come in on that one, or shall I move on to
the point of my 80-meter slide is that to beware,
Yeah.
and I can, looking at buildings, if I've got resi, a care home, I look at the type of user and I work very closely with the fire engineer and to assess the risk, and then that is built into it. So for instance, I'm building 3-story large care homes, but we're applying the same rules as we do for the high risk because with the occupancy. So have some common sense. They're out there as rules, but look at what you're actually doing. Look at it case by case. Work very closely with your fire officer, your fire engineers.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to another question, and each of you have kind of obviously talked about some of these, but the question is, what do you see as the biggest challenges or pinch points to compliance with the building safety regulation in the next 12 to 24 months? So if we want to know, the audience member wants to know what the biggest challenge is, basically, or the biggest pinch points. I don't know who wants to come in there.
Can I just kick off with, I think the biggest challenge is going to be timescales. It's supposed to be 8 weeks for an existing refurb and 12 weeks. We've already been given guidance that it's been extended to 20 weeks because they can't cope with the applications as such, because we've been making Gateway 2 applications on existing buildings. That's half a year. That's half a year before we can actually start putting back. And I understand the hard stop, rightly or wrongly, to be putting back the new EWI or material or external, whatever you're going to do. So that's half a year now.
Yeah, same point, but just around resource, which I think is really what you're saying there, Vicky, as well. From our perspective, I mean, if we take safety case in isolation, the generation of building safety cases, obviously from the 1st of April, the regulator can come knocking on people's door and say, show us your safety case. Well, if there's over 12,500 relevant buildings in England and Wales that require a safety case, I mean, we look at our own divisional resourcing about how many we can take on. We'd only want to take on about a dozen of these safety cases in any given year. And even that that's a lot. That's a huge amount of work that needs to go into generating those. So resource-wise, how we can actually deliver the requirements by the dates that are set is an incredible challenge.
I'd imagine there's a question mark over the regulators' resources as well, isn't there?
And on that, Carl, they have prioritised which buildings they're going to, which existing high-risk buildings they're going to be approaching for their building assessment certificate and the safety case. They are the highest buildings, so starting above 50 metres and then working down. Those with the most residents, so those with the most units and residents within them. Within that is also those with unremediated ACM cladding. And they also have, for those of you who probably most people on this call will know about it, but it starts to become how well you know your history. Those flats that were built pre-Ronan Point, which I think was about 1968, that have a gas supply and which with system panels and haven't been remediated since then. So they have already prioritised out of those existing high risk buildings which ones that they are going to be looking at first. If you've got one of them, you're going to be on the hit list. Just to come back to the challenge and the pinch points, I think for mine it comes back to that clarity and understanding what needs to happen. That's the biggest pinch points I'm hearing from clients. What is it that they need to be doing? And without the guidance, investors are just saying, we're going to sit tight and wait. And I emphasize my point. I don't think they're waiting to be told what to do, but they do. It's too expensive to get it wrong. You make a decision on what you think is good for 2 staircases, and Michael Gove makes another statement that changes the rules. Where does that leave you? So for me, that's the biggest pinch point. And what we are seeing, if there's no high risk buildings and haven't been since October, and we're now in March, that doesn't bode well for the homes we are looking to deliver over the next 2 to 5 years.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. I'm just going to take quite it'll probably be quite a brief discussion about this one, but Philip Tandy of ACOM wants to clear up something. So he says the Building Safety Regulator is saying there are no Gateway 2 applications yet, but BTP are saying they have made them. Who is correct? So Vicky, I don't know.
We
whether you
have
can shed some light on that, but
we have drafted our first application. I'll have to check whether we've actually hit the button on that.
Yeah.
It's for an existing block that we are through, and we're just waiting for one piece of information. So we've trawled through it all, and we have got one application ready, and we have got 3 or 4 in the pipeline getting near.
okay, thank you.
This is
just to
for
finish,
existing. This is
For
for
existing
existing
buildings, not
buildings,
new.
not new. Sorry, just to
right,
clarify
okay,
that.
yeah,
That might be what the
okay,
confusion is.
yes, okay. Just going to finish because we've got 4 minutes left, but I just there's quite a good question about the industry's engagement with the regulator, how that engagement has been so far, but also how would the panel like to see that develop in the next 12 months. So what would you like to see the industry, I'll reframe that as, what would you like to see the industry do differently or do better or do more of in terms of its engagement with the new regime and the regulator? I don't know who wants to take that first. James is smiling, but I can't tell whether that's because he wants to go first or whether he's praying that he doesn't have to go first.
No, it's where you start with that.
All right.
To pick the the low hanging fruit, to take a really overused term. I mean, I guess look, from our perspective, the engagement with the regulator, I think it needs to be a discussion. I think previously we were aware of some projects where you would send things for approval and it would disappear into a black hole. You would get comments back. I think that doesn't work when we're dealing with higher risk buildings and the regulator. I think it needs to be an open communication where you present, and this is what my understanding of what the regulator are saying is that it is a dialogue where it's right. Show us how your building works, and I think the only way you can do that is by making engineered justifications. And I'm obviously very focused into design and looking at the fire safety design of a building specifically. But that's the only way it will really work, and that's how it works with the major accident hazards unit. Looking at petrochemical industries. Now, the big caveat to that is there's only between 200 and 300 offshore installations in the UK that the major accident hazards unit look after, and we have tens of thousands of buildings. As I say, 12,500 relevant buildings as a lowball estimate. I think there was about 14,000 buildings registered. That number may have changed in the last month or two. The scope of the Building Safety Regulator is much larger, so we obviously have to be cognizant of that.
Okay. Susanna, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think it depends where you sit as what we mean by engagement with the regulator. And engagement with the regime is different to engagement with the regulator. I think part of the challenge is the regulator's been a lot on transmit. They've done huge amounts of webinars. They did those whole series of question and answer sessions. So they've been really keen to engage, but they only have so much bandwidth and so much capacity. And I think the other challenge is we've been very used to the HSE through CDM and health and safety being much more open to dialogue and looking at how we collectively solve problems. I think the regulator, it is a regulator, it is the Building Safety Regulator. So it initially talked about engaging early with people with applications, but more recently it said, well, we can't do that. We are waiting, as James says, for you to demonstrate to us that you have complied. So there is a bit of a challenge at the moment, but that will be down to capacity, that will be down to bandwidth, that will be down to the volume of questions. We get hundreds of emails each week on the building safety regime. I imagine the regulator can't even click their inbox fast enough to read them all. So I think that is a challenge, but I don't expect it to change.
Yeah,
rolls out.
I'd agree with that. Being the boots on the ground, we're not hearing nothing. And it's a bit like we're asking questions. We want to know, we want information, we want to engage, we want to have dialogue. We're getting no feedback, and it's just it just makes it hard because we're thinking, have we got this right? Because the last thing we want to do is make submissions and then have to go back to the starting blocks because we've missed a point. We've gone through it with a fine tooth comb, but still we'd like to chat to them. And they're saying they wanted 2 weeks notice before. It's just not that the communication's just not there.
Okay, thanks, Vicky. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. I don't know about you, but it's gone really quickly for me. It's a really fascinating discussion. So thank you to our 3 panelists. This is just the first of 5 webinars we've got over the next couple of days on risk and regulations. So this afternoon at 2 p.m. we have a session on building control. And then tomorrow we have sessions on the construction industry scheme, the MPPF and Part L. But that's it from us. So just thank you again, James, Vicky and Susanna, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.